And so now it's time for us to start off with Microsoft's own Swetcha talking about custom code.
Hi, Swetcha. You're on mute.
Hello.
So you can take that one out of the way.
Cool. So, Wagner, can you share my screen if you don't mind?
Yes. All yours.
Yes. All right. So, hi, everyone. My name is Kent Weir. I'll be co-presenting with Swetcha. I'm part of the PM team and here to make an announcement. And so it's pretty exciting. I think we need a drum roll. So what we're going to announce today is custom code extensibility for Azure Logic Apps Standard. And let me get to the slide here. And so this is something that we've been working on for a little bit of time now. And it's finally ready to share with the world. This is a public preview. And so the goal of this is that you will be able to author custom code, compile that custom code, and then be able to use a built-in action found in Logic Apps Standard. In this case, it's here on the screen, to be able to go ahead and call this compiled code. Now, we do have a local debug experience for both workflows and code, which is pretty cool. So the ability to set a breakpoint in your workflow configuration, a breakpoint in your code, and to be able to jump to those breakpoints back and forth, which is pretty awesome. We also have full support for dynamic schema, inputs and outputs, including complex types. So what this means is that as you go ahead and build out, say, a method within your code, and you want to call it from Logic Apps, I'm sure you have an expectation that you'd be able to go ahead and use Token Picker and use dynamic content in order to go ahead and populate the request, and then also be able to use the output downstream in subsequent actions. And that is something that's supported and is actually quite neat. Another benefit of this, and this is based on a lot of customer feedback, is that customers were looking for the ability to run their code in the same service plan. So in this case, the workflow service plan as the workflows. So this helps you in terms of your development lifecycle of being able to build these things in the same session of VS Code, the ability to then go ahead and deploy it, and then deploy it to a single service plan. And what this also means is that this executes on the same machine, so you don't have another security surface that you have to manage and protect. That's all happening for you. Now, one of the initial drivers of this was certainly BizTalk migration. As we talk to customers, there's a lot of .NET investments that have been made, and customers are looking for a way to move that forward as they are on their journey to migrating integration workloads to the cloud. But certainly, you don't have to have BizTalk to use this. Generally, there's always some needs for some extensibility, and so that's what we're offering here today. And now this is public preview as of today. Look for a blog post around noon Pacific. We just started working through some last minute logistics in terms of deployment, but this is something that you'll be able to go ahead and try later on today. So do look for blog post on Tech Community, and we will make it available and you'll be able to go ahead and try it out. So with all of that said, I'm going to hand it over to Swetcha, who's actually one of the engineers that worked on this project. So you are getting some great insights by one of the people that actually built this feature. So Swetcha, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you, Kent. If you go ahead and show my screen. So I'll be showing you guys the new feature. And to kind of start off, one of the really cool things that we created for public preview is having another VS Code extension that'll allow for you to create a function and a logic app in the same workspace. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm just going to call this workspace for now, and I'll provide this a function name. So we'll just call this AV Func App. And then for namespace, let's do test function. And then we'll do a stateful workflow. And then for this, let's call this logic. And I'm going to open this in a new window. And as it's opening, you'll see that we will have a workspace that will include both the function app as well as the like logic app as well. Let me expand this. Oh, whoops, wrong one. Okay, I think that one. All right. Okay, so let me go over to the actual class itself. So as you can see here, we provide the user a template. And so this kind of just will be some kind of template code that you can execute. So that way you can ensure that it's working on your end before you start adding any of your custom code. And as you can see here, we have a specific trigger for this type of custom code action. And then we also are able to give different parameter values. So we're able to do like integer strings, but we can also do complex objects like a JSON object, for example, or a J object. So this is the template in this case. And then we also have the logic app. So I'm going to go ahead and open the workflow, and I'll open this up in the designer as well. But as you can see, we also provide a logic app workflow.
Switcher, I think your screen is on the other screen. So you just needed to bring that same one where the invoked functions.css might be on the second monitor.
Bad. Okay, can you guys see it now?
Or just share the full screen.
Okay, let me know if you can see the workflow now. Okay,
Yes.
That looks right. Okay, sorry about that, guys. So this is the workflow that I was referring to. And this basically gives you a template workflow so that way you can also execute the logic app before you start adding any of your own additions. And in case we didn't see the CS class, I'll show that again. So like I mentioned before, we have a template function. And in this case, we have a specific trigger action for this type of like custom code feature. And then we're also able to give different parameter values. So in this case, we can do stuff like integer, string, but we can also do dynamic parameters. So in this case, like we're going to use an integer and a string, and I'll show how this comes into play later on from how you can call it from a logic apps perspective. So I'm going to go ahead and run this now, or build, sorry, I'm going to go ahead and build the function side. Okay, and it succeeded. And before we get started with the logic app side, I'm going to go ahead and start up Azure, right? We need to do this 3 times for each of the services. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and open this in the designer. And in this case, I will actually show you like the new action that we created for this. So this is going to be the invoke function action. Okay, and as you can see, this is the action. This is like the template that is like the action that's provided with the template. But what I'm going to go ahead and do is delete this and create a new one. And with one of the like really cool features that we implemented is we're able to get function names and parameters dynamically. So the user will no longer have to input this directly the way they would have had to in private preview. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my function parameters. Okay, let's go ahead and save this. And then I'm going to go over here and click on the logic app side to run this. Let's see, right here. So right now I am going to run the function that we just, or the logic app that we just created. And it's a bit slow, so just give it a little bit. Okay, and if we remember, this was the name of our function that we gave it. So now it's been injected into the runtime. And so what we can do now is we can go into the overview and run the trigger on it. And that'll be able to actually execute our code. All right, I'm going to go ahead and run the trigger. Let me pull this down so that way I can expand the run a bit. Okay, so it looks like the first one that I clicked on already succeeded. We can wait for this one to succeed as well, but I'll open this run up so that way we can get an idea of what it is that it's going to show us after the code has been executed. So if you look here, I gave it the different inputs, right, for the zip code and the Celsius value. And this is the body that we are going to retrieve from our output. So in this case, we get like the zip code, we get the current weather. And one of the really cool features that we have is that you'll be able to grab these tokens individually. And so you won't necessarily have to just call like the entire output. You can call like whatever token you need. So I could call just the current weather, and I can show that again as well. But let me go ahead and show the response. And in the response, we are calling the body. Okay, so then I'm going to also show the debugging feature. But really quickly, I want to show off the dynamic tokens that I was referring to. So if we go here, we can see that we're able to call all of those tokens individually, as well as calling the output overall. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and debug. Okay, I'm going to put a breakpoint in both the logic app and the function app. And at first, you have to attach it to the logic app, and then you will have to attach it to the .NET function one. And what we'll do here is after both of those are attached, I'm going to go into the overview and run the trigger. And by doing that, you will be able to debug both the function class as well as the workflow.json file. So I'm going to give it a few seconds, make sure I can see it in the call stack before I go ahead and run that trigger. Let's double check that that's going. Okay, so it looks like both of those are good. We'll go ahead and open the overview. Alrighty, and once I press this, we should be able to debug. Okay, so as you can see, it goes into our workflow.json file. And now after I click over this, it will take me into the function class. And if we look over here on the left side where the local variables are popping up, you can see that after we go through each variable, we can get the value that we are giving it. So it's really nice that you can be able to see exactly what you're going to be able to debug with this project. So as you can see, I can get all of the values for this. I'll expand this a bit. Never mind. Okay, and then I'll go through, and then we can see that there is the result. And after stepping over this, we'll come back to the weather class. Let me step out of this. And yep, you can see that our invoke function action executed properly. But yeah, that is the debugger as well. So it's really nice that we have both capabilities. And I think this will be really great for developers to be able to actually debug both the function side and the logic app side. But that is the entirety of the demo. If you guys have any specific questions at the end, please feel free to ask.
Yeah, there's been some questions, Swetcha, that have been answering sort of as you've sort of worked through the demo, but thanks for demoing that. That's cool. So one thing we wanted to do here as part of this event was ask you some questions about your experiences. I feel like there's many people that were curious what it's like to be an engineer at Microsoft and sort of what a day in the life is, if you will. So I've got a few questions to ask you, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Question number one is, like, what was your initial reaction when you found out you're going to be working on this custom code project?
To be very transparent, I was honestly incredibly intimidated. I think this was my first job coming out of college, and it was my first project starting on like Logic Apps. So it's definitely intimidating as in terms of like the scope of the project. But I remember seeing the mock-ups and being incredibly interested in what this was. And I knew that this was a product that a lot of people could benefit from. And as time went on, like, I feel like the worry of like the scope of the project kind of died down, and it was more of just like a genuine interest to get this out there for people. And now I'm like, wow, this is so cool that we can like execute code in a Logic app like this. And like, as I understand the project more, I'm like, this is just such a cool project. And like, I'm honestly so grateful that I was able to work on this.
Cool. Yeah, no, it's been a lot of fun, and I've been pretty excited about it too. So I hear you. Another question is, what was the most challenging requirement that you had to deal with as part of this project, and how did you solve it?
Yeah, so I think one of the hardest requirements was getting the ball rolling on how to go about invoking a function from a compiled assembly in the Logic App side. There's a lot of smaller aspects of this, like how to invoke an assembly by reflection. Like there are things that you kind of know as a dev, but like to use that knowledge and incorporate it into the Logic Apps runtime and like how it works with their architecture. I think that was one of the big things that we had to initially get started. And once that was like figured out, it was a big error process on how we could go about experimenting with this to get it to be injected into the runtime and then later on be invoked. After that, like we were able to like kind of get the ball rolling on everything else. And I think this like requirement definitely needed a lot of research. And I think because this touches on the functions SDK and it touches on the Logic Apps runtime, there were two kind of bigger components that I had to learn about as I started this job. So honestly, just a lot of learning. But overall, I think like it is a hard thing. But once we got that ball rolling, like I think the rest of the requirements were honestly like very much so easier at that point because like we had just gotten past that one.
Makes sense. And so we've had a private preview. I think we launched private preview I think it was like January, and we had some customers that participated in that, and we certainly appreciate the feedback that we got from them because I feel like that helped accrue a lot of value to where we are today. So since private preview, like of the investments we made into the custom code experience, what's your favorite new feature and why?
So my favorite feature is the new VS Code extension that I just showed like at the beginning. Initially, like we had to set up like two separate workspaces for VS Code to be able to run one function and to run Logic App on the other side. Then we were able to get it to work in one workspace. And so there's just been an evolution of it, but we had to test it completely manually. So the fact that like users can go in, click a button, enter in what they need for functions, for the Logic Apps, like just naming stuff, and we just spit it out for them. Like it's such a great feature. We had a front-end engineer named Sammy who worked on this, and like she did an incredible job. And I think it's made it so much significantly easier for a lot of people to use this product. And like in general, from my end, like testing as a developer, like this has reduced time for testing significantly. And I think it just makes it so much more accessible, especially with the template. Now that people can have something to go off of, we know that they can at least have a working product before they start incorporating their own code.
Yeah, absolutely. Shout out to Sammy. That was some work that was done in short order, and once again, like joined the team and ramped up quickly. So it's very awesome. And I think the key benefit is, like, I think from a goal perspective, we wanted someone to be able to go in and click that icon and have like a working solution in a matter of a couple minutes, and just know like, hey, this is working. And then it's now like, oh, like, how do I build upon this? How do I sort of incorporate my own logic and things like that? And I think we've been able to achieve that. So I'm pretty pumped about it. I think it's a great feature. I'd also say I think the dynamic schema stuff's pretty cool too.
Yeah, the drop downs.
Yeah, so kudos to you. I think the build tasks that go and compile the code, and then there's some metadata that's generated that the designer can then use to figure out like what are the inputs, what are the outputs. I think that's a pretty cool feature too. So, and then last question, I think we'll probably have time for a few from the audience as well. So folks, feel free to drop something in chat. So I guess anything else you'd like to share with the audience based upon today's demo?
I would just say, like, again, I'm really grateful to have gotten to work on this project, especially as a new grad. Like, it's just such an overall amazing project, and like to have some kind of ownership over it is amazing. I'm really proud of the work that Sammy and I have contributed to this, and like it's just really nice to be able to see this go from an idea to an actual product, and I'm excited to see what customers think of it. And then lastly, like, I would really appreciate, like, if you guys have any feedback, to please reach out to Kent or I. Like, there's so much that we can take from that and like build before GA. And we're always looking for more feedback. I know from my end and from Sammy's end too, like, we would love the feedback on this product.
Cool. Thank you so much. I think there's a couple here in chat that we can try to address. Wagner, I wanted to drive that just so you can click the button.
Yeah, sure. So first question is from Cameron McKay. So when setting a breakpoint in the workflow JSON file for the Logic Apps, does the designer show the state at the point of pause in the breakpoint?
Yes, it should. So I don't think I did it on my end, but you can like kind of pause and like play the like action on the left side of VS Code. You can do both for those. In my case, I was just stepping over so I could give people more insight on what is provided in the variable information.
Yeah. And one point to note is that although you don't see that on the designer, is always the code base, right? So you see that at the code level, but all the items on the pane there is going to be reflected for the Logic Apps as well as the functions. Next question that we have is from Stephen Clennan. Will it scale when creating custom code that takes a lot of the memory and CPU? How that is going to work?
So I can give a little bit of a description on this, Kent. If you have any more intake after this, let me know. But I would say this is something that we will have to experiment with. Since this is kind of just something that we've been using, we haven't really been able to like scope with the scale yet. And we don't know how much CPU or memory this will take.
Yeah, and just to add to this, just to give some insights into architecture, because actually in the blog post, we talk about this a little bit. So I guess number one, from a principal perspective, like think of this in the paradigm of Logic Apps today, right? So if you've got any sort of like upper limits, so if you go to like the limits and configuration page, like you're going to see things around like the default timeout for an action to execute, like that's 10 minutes by default. The other thing is if you go ahead and look at message payload, generally you've got like 100 meg limit as well. So think of it in those terms. It's not necessarily something we're doing specific to the custom code itself, but it's more of like, how does this fit into the existing Logic Apps architecture? Now, I think there's some sweet spots for using this feature, and we call this out in the blog post, which will be out later today. So if you need to do some like, custom business logic, go for it. If you need to do some parsing, go for it. Some sort of data validation, go for it. I would call it like simpler data transformations, go for it. If you're trying to take like a BizTalk pipeline component that does streams a 1 gig file, like this is not that solution, right? Like we're still talking about like cloud-based architectures. So, to a certain extent, like this is public preview. We are interested in learning from customers and getting your scenarios, but I'd say that should be some rough guidelines in terms of like where to get started with this and what you can expect. And obviously, like when we talk about like Logic Apps density, generally that's more bound by triggers in the sense of like how many workflows can I put in a Logic app and sort of what's like sort of the performance footprints or characteristics of that. this is going to run within like the same service plan and the same footprint. So if you end up doing a lot of like heavy custom code work, like that might warrant scaling out, or that might warrant scaling up. Like it's, there's always sort of that give and take in terms of like, what am I trying to do? But, as we get more feedback from customers, more usage, certainly we'll be putting out more guidance around this and share more of those characteristics.
Okay, I think we are at time, since we have a whole lot of more content to go. Right?
Yeah, maybe just one last thing. I see Warren's question here, so looking forward to learning more about this. So yeah, there will be a blog post later out today. As soon as this is public, we've sort of pushed to marketplace. The blog post will go out there. We'll give you a complete walkthrough of how you get this working. And then also, I've already got a video on my YouTube channel as well that sort of does a walkthrough. So there will be resources right away that you'll be able to take advantage of.
Cool. And I'm assuming that you're going to be staying a little while on the chat, replying some other questions. Cameron just put another one.
For sure.
Right?
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we have to go to the next one. Yep. Actually, while Stephen arrives, because I saw him connected and he's just leaving. If you wanted to take that last one, because I think it's going to be relatively quick, and then I can bring Stephen to the stream.
Yes. So gotcha. So this one, yeah. So when you deploy, because what happens is you have to compile your source code. That source code compilation actually gets copied, or what we call bin placed, into your Logic App workflow project. You deploy that as you do today, whether that's through CI/CD or right-click deploy. That will land in Azure. Obviously, it lands in a service plan, and the execution itself behind the scenes is on the same machine. And so that was like a conscious decision for ourselves. Like, we wanted to reduce latency. We didn't want to introduce another security surface for you to have to govern and enforce. And so as a result, that's running on the same sort of Logic Apps infrastructure as your workflow.
Cool. Thanks. Thank you so much.
I wanted to call out about that we have the ability to be able to deploy to Logic App from VS Code as well. So if anyone wants to test it out, that is something you can try out.
Yeah.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. Thank you, both of you. There was, as James said, it was mind-blowing, right? So thank you for all of that. And let's start with our next piece on the show.